Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for those of you who are going to wait on your lunch. I want to say this is going to be a very impactful panel because you're going to really learn about how blockchain is changing the world and really impacting the way people live. So my name is Sheetal Mehta Walsh. I'm an angel investor. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm on the board of MetaCert. You must have heard of Crypto Night yesterday afternoon. It's the extension browser to protect you from phishing. You might have seen my husband talk, or at least remembered his red shoes. I also run a global entrepreneur program for the British government, and my biggest passion in life is Shanti Life. So it's a microfinance not-for-profit in India, helping women access safe sanitation and create livelihoods. I'm really interested in our panel today because the work we're doing in India really relies on identifying who we're working with, that they say they are who they really are when we give them resources. It also really requires transparency, so there's a place for blockchain in what we're doing. I really would like to now welcome this amazing group of people, the four gentlemen to my right. I've got, first of all, I'm going to talk about a JP at the very end here. JP, give a wave. So JP has spent about 25 years in the UK, in Europe, and in the US, working with startups, working with large corporates. He's raised around 500 million and impacted a lot of businesses. He's currently the CEO of Collaborative Health. And Collaborative Health is something probably none of us think about when we come to a blockchain conference.
Now hear this. There's a white BMW on here with lights on. I say again, there's a white BMW on the pier with lights on.
I wish that was my BMW.
Yes. So Collaborative Health Services. Excuse me. Okay. So Collaborative Health Services is really, really important because it's an opportunity to build electronic reports. These electronic reports will help victims of abuse go through the system of making sure they're being reported, making sure the crimes are being reported, and making sure that they get the right services they need at the right time. I don't want to bring this to a miserable state, but imagine you've been shot or you've been abused. Do you know how many people you have to speak to, from clinics to hospitals to healthcare, insurance, et cetera, et cetera? So JP's business is focusing on streamlining this, providing transparency, and really helping the victims live safe and secure lives. So thank you, JP, for what you're doing. We'll hear more about that in a minute. Here, right in the center, we've got Joseph Thompson. He's the CEO of AID.Tech. He's flown all the way over from Dublin, Ireland. A very impressive gentleman, and his business is focused on really working with refugees around the world. His business is really focused on social and financial inclusion for all of the underserved population. And Joseph, this year alone, I think, received 300,000 plus in grants and awards. Awards from Citibank, from KPMG, from many, many organizations, and he has a partnership with the International Red Cross to really make a difference. So we'll hear more from him in a moment. To my right, we have Markeze, Bryant, and he is an investor, impact investor at Acumen. Markeze is really interesting. He's very quiet and humble, but when I talked to him, he said something to me that really inspired me. His focus and interest in investing is really about accessibility. So who are the people who are getting investment? And I think that's something that's really, really important. It's one thing to talk about venture capital, angel investing, social impact, but when we really drill down deep, we want to know, actually, are people investable, and are they getting the access that they really need? To the right here, the gentleman with the glasses, we have Robby Greenfield the fourth. He is the social development impact chef at ConsenSys. All of you here, I'm sure, have heard of ConsenSys, but I'm sure many of you did not know that there's an individual who has founded the social impact team and who is really, really responsible on how we ensure that blockchain projects are being implemented to really impact the world. So he's also exited a business in health, and I think there's some really inspiring people here. When we talk about blockchain and we talk about impacting the world, there's a lot of confusion, I think, and intertwining with cryptocurrency, and a perception that it's all very related and all very connected. But for the purpose of our panel, we can feel very free to be able to differentiate and to say there are blockchain implementations which have nothing to do with cryptocurrency at all. They may or they may not include tokens. So keeping that in mind, Robby, I'd really like you to talk, if you can, about some of the companies that you're working with and how are they implementing blockchain to make the world a better place?
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, I can't name all of the companies, but I can go into a lot of the different use cases in which we're employing blockchain technology and sometimes even different types of cryptocurrency to aid different areas, whether it be internationally and most recently a few domestic use cases as well, like collaborative health solutions. So some of the first that we're looking at is sex trafficking, a lot of things around self-sovereign identity, and particularly, how can you affect niche areas within very large subset problems. So, obviously blockchain can't solve all of sex trafficking. But there are some core components, particularly in emerging economies, that it can provide, some really useful tools and insights. Particularly when it comes to, job verification on-chain, because a lot of people who are coerced into sex trafficking usually leave by their own means to some false opportunity. The same thing with actually having self-sovereign identity for those who are wards of the state, or who have recently left the trauma of sex trafficking and are joining shelters. The reason why you would want to give them that is because you want to be able to track who they interact with and whether they're leaving the country or not in a way that can keep them safe as a preventative measure. But of course, on the other side of things, there's a great deal or consideration of thought that needs to go into when you employ kind of nationally sponsored self-sovereign identity programs. What are some of the issues with that, right? It certainly can be used as a tool of control, and creating policy around a solution and making sure that when you go into these different areas that you're not just giving them some tech and saying, here you go. On the other side of things, we have a lot of self-sovereign finance projects. So obviously, I would say the most vanilla case is just money transfer into high impact areas, so going from crypto to cash and circumventing banking systems that may not want to provide area to the nonprofit that you may be helping. And the same is true for recreating microfinancial services in terms of lending, in terms of insurance, to emerging economies that are usually based in rural areas. So they have high smartphone penetration, but they don't have access to some of the things that can help their social mobility. And then I would say the last thing that we, literally yesterday just started looking to was tokenizing social services and bringing liquidity to markets like housing vouchers and supplemental nutritional programs in a productive way that's much better than the current underfunded bureaucratic system that we have now. Those are a few.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I had no idea before I met Robby that ConsenSys are actually really giving back and providing service and guidance in that space. So that's really, really inspiring. Thank you. Joseph, I'd like you to please start. Can you please explain to us how AID.Tech is leveraging blockchain for good?
Sure. So first of all, it's great to be here. So what AID.Tech does is we were the first company in the world to deliver international aid with Syrian refugees in Syria and Lebanon over 2.5 years ago. And what we did there was we equipped the end beneficiaries with an identity, and they could control how they spend the money themselves. But what was important, though, from the business use case was the donors could see where the money went. So the donors could actually be safe in the knowledge they knew where their money was going. And when we looked at this space, we saw there's fintech, there's regtech, and we created AID.Tech to create a new industry. So we wanted to bring the newest innovative technology to serve the 2.4 billion people who don't have an identity around the world, for example. So instead of going in banking or insurance, there's lots of great companies already doing that. We saw this opportunity as using technology for good, but as a for-profit business, because governments are going to spend this money anyway, and the governments are very, very inefficient. So I have no problem charging governments, but we won't charge end beneficiaries, for example. And we see the blockchain as a gateway for end beneficiaries to access different services, just as you were saying there. So it could be health, education, welfare. So for example, we're doing a project in Tanzania where women who are pregnant or have just had a baby can go for a health checkup with a doctor. If they don't see their doctor or if they don't turn up for the visit, it can trigger an alarm. So the donor doesn't pay the doctor's not putting in a fraudulent claim, and the mother can build a credit profile based on data transactions. So it's really, really smart ways that if the blockchain guarantees something gets from point A to point B, it's the data on top which is going to be the difference going forward.
So your story must be very compelling to be able to partner with governments who are generally very slow and bureaucratic. So is there one or two governments who you would position as the leaders in this space?
Well, I don't know if they're the leaders in this space, but for us, we've gone with the Singapore government and the Irish government. So smaller governments are easier to move with quicker, and we basically threaten them. That says if you don't, we'll do it somewhere else. And you're going to waste money. So that's our tactic.
Fantastic. And JP, could you please give some words about how collaborative health is leveraging blockchain?
Sure. So today we have two forms and reports that are in the market. So we have a domestic violence report that is now digitized in Alameda County and the 7 hospitals in Alameda County. We also just launched a couple months ago the sexual assault form across the state of California. What most people don't realize is that as much as most medical records are electronic at this point, the minute you start talking about interpersonal violence, whether it's domestic violence, sexual assault, pediatric assault, and things people don't like to talk about a lot, the minute you go in and report that and an examiner comes out, they take out a paper form, they start filling it in pencil or pen. It's frequently illegible. It's supposed to get faxed to law enforcement, which you can imagine how accurately that's managed. And so we basically have gotten into the process of digitizing those forms and also creating electronic links to law enforcement, to the district attorney's office, as well as social services and support services. And the results have been staggering. So for domestic violence, which has been running for a few years, we basically, that's enabled, because we get consent from the victims, but we basically been able to get a number which used to be less than 4% of victims getting into social services and support services. That number is closer to 48% in Alameda County today. It's a huge movement of the needle on that one. We also see it was validated by a third party that almost 2 to 3 times as many cases are being brought forward by law enforcement and the district attorney than prior to the launch of the digital form. And a lot of that's just because the form itself is digital, they can access it electronically, they have the full record, they have photos, it's all embedded and so forth. So to answer your question, what we're looking at blockchain to do for us is we want to then expand this beyond just those 2 forms in just California and just Alameda County into a platform that has all interpersonal violence forms and reports on it, all the collaborative links associated for law enforcement, social services, and the like. And the 3 cases that we have for blockchain are the following. The data itself, the database of information is highly sensitive. The records for these victims, as much as general medical records are sensitive, these are ultra sensitive. So we want to use blockchain to first and foremost secure the database. The second thing we want to do is use it to secure the chain of custody. So in all these reports, there's the report itself, there will be photographs, we're also potentially including video, and then the last link is the actual physical evidence. So for a sexual assault, there's a physical evidence kit that gets part of that evidence package. What we want to do is be able to say down the line, using blockchain and the immutability of blockchain, that this evidence kit was Mary Jane Doe's on the 5th of October at 3 p.m. Those photos were Mary Jane Doe's on the same date at the same time. And so 3 months later, 5 months later, a year later, when that goes to court, presuming it does, the defense has no ability to claim that the photo's been doctored or the evidence kit has been tampered with or something else has happened to that the report all the way through to the photos and the evidence to say that it's not real or something has happened to it. So we're looking at the blockchain to protect that chain of custody. And then the last piece of the equation for us is to eventually use smart contracts to trigger the opening of cases at the state level and at the federal level, because the federal government has mandated that victims of violent crimes should not and will not pay for medical expenses, support services, and the like. And there's a federal fund available for that. The problem is it's the victim who has to fill out what looks like a tax form to file for those monies to become made available to pay back the health provider, whether it's a hospital or an individual, support services and so forth. And it just doesn't happen. So what we're looking to do is work with the state to create a smart contract that says if I send this block of information to you, that's enough for you to open a case that then the hospital, support services, and others can actually start claiming against. And eventually, we would like to get to a point where we could use that to trigger the actual transfer of funds. That's down the line for us as it relate to a token or some other application along those lines.
Fantastic. So you are really empowering a victim to have control of their information and hopefully improve their process to safety and security.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, what's amazing is for the biggest thing really is to get the victims into social services, the trajectory for them and their lives. And even more importantly, when you look at the data, which we now have because it's electronic, the number of these victims who have children in the home who witness these events, if you track the trajectory of these children, they are massively impacted by these events. And if we can get them into social services at the numbers we're talking about, we can not only change the victim's trajectory, we can change the trajectory of the kids, and then frankly, their kids, because their behavior with their children is materially impacted. So it really does have an exponential effect.
That's super. Markeze, we'd love to hear from you at Acumen. And what do you see as financing these types of opportunities? What do you see is happening in the next 3 to 5 years with leveraging blockchain, and how you might identify which companies you're going to invest in?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, from our perspective, you know, we are really as impact investors, we're really focused on poverty, right? And that is about access and who owns what and who can really benefit in the next economy. And I'm, you know, very excited about a lot of the projects that folks are working on. I think that this technology is only going to help humanity. So the way we think about it is which companies are extractive and which ones are not. So who owns the economic benefit from the business. So the companies that we're looking at are really collaborating with governments. They're really looking to ensure that the users of the platform can benefit more than just convenience, but economically as well. And so, you know, one of the things that makes me very excited about blockchain is the potential distributed nature of tokens and ownership in some of these companies. So that's what we see. I think my job is to ensure that, you know, some of the the real challenges can really be at least attempted to be solved, right? The entrepreneurs that are looking to innovate for Medicaid patients, that are looking to innovate for homeless patients, that they have the equity capital to go out for 2 years and try it. So we don't see enough investors. We have a few on the panel and folks that are focused on it, but I think we need more impact investors, more people that are looking to finance those types of startups.
Absolutely. So are there any impact investors here in the crowd who actually would invest in a business or in a not-for-profit or social enterprise that is leveraging blockchain? Oh, great. Fantastic. That's really, really important to hear. And I think, wouldn't it make sense that investing in those types of businesses would provide more transparency than ever before, and accountability?
Yeah, and I mean, I think you also have to kind of, you know, highlight the business case, right? I mean, this technology has the promise to reduce a lot of costs, make things more efficient, and there are a lot of pocketbooks that would benefit from that as well. And so sometimes I got to sort of spin the like, oh, this is how I'm going to help you in your job, you know, if you purchase this this particular solution. So, but yeah, I think long term, of course, accountability. It's only going to allow us to get to where we want to be as a population.
Fantastic. So do any of you want to comment on the importance of identity and documentation, because it seems to touch all of our areas of passion. And is there anything you'd like to say specifically in your implementation on how important identity is within the blockchain world?
Yeah, so I'll just jump at the first point. So if you looked in the last decade, you had the Millennium Goals. Now you have the Sustainable Development Goals, which is 190 countries have signed up to. And there's 17 targets, basically. And 16.9 says everybody should have a legal identity by 2030. So if we like it or not, that's a 2.4 billion people opportunity right there and then. So if you can get billions of people with identity, you're open to a world of services, applications, which is going to be a $1 trillion industry from a business use case, but also from the social use case. And to me, especially what's happening with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, the ability for end users to manage and provision their own data so they decide if they want to share their information, I think it's absolutely going to be so important going forward. And I think it's actually the whole Facebook debacle is a great opportunity for all organizations here. Sorry, Facebook, but it's true.
Yeah. I mean, and to extend on that, I mean, I absolutely think what's happening with Facebook is, and even Google, right? You know, and not to trash them because they brought us into Web 2.0, right? And they brought a lot of operational benefits to the world. But at the same cost, they've monopolized our identities, in which case we don't really have control. We don't have control of our data. And so we really don't have control over how we interact with these different applications and what that may mean down the road. So I think one thing that's usually left outside of the blockchain conversation is we focus so much on the solution and self-sovereign identity, whether it's through a civic or a U-port, but we don't necessarily focus on the policy that's going to need to be implemented to create a healthy ecosystem for those, you know, identities. One, to mean anything, right? Particularly when you're talking about people in emerging economies, right? They need to connect that identity to something and be able to have sovereignty over the data that's going to be associated with it. But two, how companies should manage interacting with it, and what are the guidelines? Because right now, there really aren't any. In many cases, if you're using a free product, you are the product, right? It's something that I hope to see more, as well as the design and onboarding to getting self-sovereign identity. I think is a little jank right now, but I think those improvements will make, you know, the onboarding experience to the opportunity being discussed a lot easier.
And are you and your team promoting any sort of public policy changes or trying to implement any standards?
So in our sex trafficking project in Moldova, these are more government-based policies looking at the ethics of using biomarkers for particularly underprivileged or under-resourced communities, right? Because the assumption right now, at least in the Western world with self-sovereign identity, is that you have a phone. You have a smartphone. And although you can recreate that type of identity with SMS in a way, with people who truly have nothing or people who are moving from refugee camp to refugee camp, that's just not a consistent item for them to have, just as it wouldn't be holding a birth certificate or an ID. So how can you introduce using biomarkers as self-sovereign identity in a way that doesn't put the person at risk? And that's a very fine line to kind of walk across, because some governments, like if you all blockchain is incentives, and if you give someone the incentive to take advantage of, oh, we have all these identities and they're transacting on a public chain, we could just apply machine learning and essentially determine, just like we were doing before with Google and Facebook, how they're going to behave. It puts you in a pretty bad situation. So really understanding what are the laws that should be put in place in terms of how people interact, how things should be represented on chain when it comes to identity. Yeah, so things like that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yes?
So the only thing I would add to that is, one of the things from a policy perspective that I see is, from a policymaker point of view, making it very clear the distinction between blockchain and crypto. Because unfortunately today, you go to a policymaker, and I have a colleague in the audience who deals with who deals with a lot of the policymakers around what's happening in the arena we're focused on. And she will tell you the minute you mention blockchain, they immediately go crypto, and they immediately go human trafficking, money laundering, and child pornography. And those things are all one and the same, and there is no separation. And I think it's really, really important for not just us, but the community at large to really separate that dialogue, because it's an important piece of how we can progress blockchain as a technology to enable all these fantastic things, and not have people equate it, not that there aren't fantastic things happening in crypto as well, but just to separate that dialogue so you can have a different conversation and be articulate about it.
Absolutely, that's really important. Let's see what happens next year when we come back together. I really want to give, I hope all of you can give a really, really, really huge thank you to this panel. These are the 4 guys that I could find from Ireland across the US who are really implementing blockchain in a way or supporting and investing in companies that are going to make a difference in the world. So remember, you know, the world of technology, it's fantastic. We can make lots of money. We can do so many things we've never done before. But if we can impact humanity and really change the way people are affected, I think that's really why we're here. So thanks, guys.